So, I have to say, this probably has to be one of the weirdest episodes of Newsflash that I have ever really done. I'm not even sitting right now. I'm just walking around and recording this into my phone. So we will see how that, all turns out when I listen back to it. But what a moment coming to you as we really... And I'm literally like outside right now. You may be able to hear, the birds in the background, but it is literally an unprecedented moment. Joe Biden dropping out of the race. I was sitting in bed when I heard, just lounging around. And this is literally, if you're ready for the sound that I made when I found out, BBC News notification. They always get me. They know, they're quick on the beat, the British are. But they had this notification. Biden has announced he's dropping out of the race. I literally ran to tell everyone else. I was with my family in the house. It is something that we have all kind of known has been happening, but what a ride it has been. Joe Biden entering this race at a time when a lot of people in 2020 thought that even then, with the personal tragedy that his family had been through with the loss of Beau Biden, looked over by Obama to much chagrin of his, in 2016, ending up losing, or Hillary Clinton ended up losing to Trump. Everyone was kind of shocked that he'd enter the race. He comes back with the help of Obama in dramatic fashion, winning South Carolina and Super Tuesday on a increased black support, going on then to beat Trump, having a tumultuous reign, to say the least, in his 4 years as president. Some good on the economic policy front in terms of labor, antitrust, and the environment. I'd say there's a lot of good there. But some real problems, some embracing of right-wing policies on things like immigration, completely forgetting about the issue of healthcare, which was a really, devastating thing, I think, for his legacy. But, doing some, pretty major things, while also, I think it has to be said, presiding over one of the worst atrocities that this country has done in a relatively short time, because we're America, but probably, since Iraq, in Gaza. This is something that cannot be overstated, and is something that probably won't, but really should, maybe not immediately, but really should go down in terms of one of Joe Biden and one of American presidency's greatest crimes, which is continuously providing money, violating our own laws, providing money to provide weapons to a genocidal regime that has really committed atrocity after atrocity in the Gaza Strip. And, doing it for so long, but really doing it at this time of really awful Israeli expansion. But, despite it all, he was at the night of the first debate, relatively hanging close, I think it's fair to say, with the reinvigorated Donald Trump. And that debate where he essentially revealed to everyone that their biggest concern that they'd always had of him, which was his age, which was his ability to string a sentence together, which was his ability to represent American interests in the world stage. Every fear that, many, many Americans watching him had, and that had been reflected in the polls, and, that came true and then some on that night of the debate. But I think most importantly, the elites knew, the quote-unquote elites of the Democratic Party knew that they had to do something. They knew that they couldn't pretend that he was still just as sharp as he'd always been, and maybe he, just lost a few steps. They had to, do some sort of action. But as you know, they loved Joe Biden. They think he's a great man, even though he should, by all accounts, be getting a first-class ticket or one-way ticket, I guess, would be the more appropriate term, to The Hague for what he did in Gaza and what he has perpetrated in Gaza. He's a good man, so they didn't want to put too much pressure on him. They didn't want to, do the things that they eventually had to do to force him out, because since the debate up until now, July 21st, almost an entire month, I believe just a few days short of an entire month, I may be wrong on that though, they were able to force him out this afternoon, but it was through weeks of clawing on, of crazy events like the former assassination of former president, or attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. And he finally ran out of room this past week with Nancy Pelosi, with Barack Obama, and even Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries threatening to take their concerns that they've long held and the concerns of their caucuses, which they had long, over these last 3 weeks, had tried to reflect, had tried to tell Biden that his position was increasingly untenable. And I think Nancy Pelosi, probably more than any single other person except for maybe Barack Obama, we'll see more reporting on this, was really able to end this incredible streak of narcissism, of arrogance, of selfishness by Joe Biden, refusing to drop down, refusing to acknowledge reality until, Nancy Pelosi, I think, called him that one day and maybe began to kind of get through to him. As of Saturday night, he was still very firmly in, but something about sleeping on it, maybe Jill had a talk with him that he was out by the next morning. And whether it was Nancy Pelosi's really remarkable kind of intervention, I think, through Adam Schiff, as we've talked about in past shows, or whether it was her reported phone call, which I think is pretty fair to say took place exactly as written, where she called up and said, get me the advisor, get me Mike Donilon, who's showing you these polls that said you can still win, that you can still have a chance, and I'm going to talk to them and, prove them wrong here. I think it's too early to see what exactly was the kind of deciding factor, but I think Nancy Pelosi, when the dust settles, will probably have more to do with it than any one single politician. And in my article for Substack and a lot of my shows previous, I've talked about the lack of one unifying voice to push Biden out, to go to him and be that kind of elder statesman or woman in the party and say, you know what, Joe, it's time to go. This is an untenable situation. And I think Nancy Pelosi, was the one who, in the end, stepped up and did that. So what does this mean for the election? It's something that we've kind of thought about, we've theorized, we've hypothesized kind of endlessly about, right? So what happens when Kamala is gone? And I think, what we are seeing here what happens when Biden is gone? What happens when, this narcissistic kind of temper tantrum comes to an end, and we see, this guy who for his entire life has wanted to be president, has failed miserably at it, 2 times, and was saved in his kind of dying days by an intervention from Obama. What happens when he finally accepts that he has to give up on his lifelong dream? Well, the answer is, we don't really truly know yet. And I know I thought I said at the end of Newsflash that he would survive the weekend. Most likely, I thought he would be able to hold on for a little bit longer. But I think that, I've heard the Saturday night was a big kind of decision point change. So we'll see what happened then. But with regards to, what's next, we don't really know, because Kamala is definitely the favorite. It was a very interesting kind of moment. It was a very, Democrat brain moment to try and leave the original kind of letter where he says, yeah, I'm dropping out, trying to essentially leave that letter kind of unpoliticized without the Kamala Harris endorsement, and setting that in a tweet just moments later, like 3-4 minutes after the fact. I think that is kind of a Democrat move to try and not politicize the sanctity of the presidential announcement, not to try and politicize history. But it is really clear, and as we've seen with the Biden for America campaign trying to file now to become Harris for America, that's just happened in these last few hours, that has been a sign that the Biden machine, such as it was, is really pouring into, turning into the Harris machine. And we've seen reports, money starting to come back in already. So that's something that I think a lot of people will be, kind of very happy to see this change at the top of the ticket that we knew was kind of needed and was kind of coming after we lost so many elements of the party for such a long time, and really over a short period of time. We talked about just 3 weeks. Kamala has been endorsed by Biden, as we talked about just moments later, but several others have, including, I think, most notably Obama. And I heard, on my drive recently, Eric Adams say that he, on CNN, was not going to endorse the vice president, who's now, again, confirmed that she is running, with a big thank you to Joe. We did it, Joe. We did it. The coconut has fallen from the tree. And so she is officially in the race. But what remains to be seen is how will this process play out. I think notable from that Joe Biden letter, where, he essentially announces he's dropping out. I'll have more to say to you on this later in the week. It's just like, you just announced probably one of the most consequential decisions in presidential political history in a very long time. And you're just like, yeah, I'll catch up with you about it in a few days, which, I think shows very clearly that his decision was the right one in terms of dropping out. It's like, if you can't at least walk to the teleprompter, do that classic presidential walk, same Lyndon B. Johnson did when he announced that he was not seeking a second term. I feel like that is a good a sign as any that you are not able to, fulfill the role of the office. But we don't know exactly the mechanisms of how that will be handed over. Of course, it all centers around the nominating process, which, again, is supposed to be at the convention, but was due to start around August. I believe it was actually due to start tomorrow. So we'll see if that changes. I'm assuming that it will have to change in a kind of a major way to actually give the party time to sort this out. Again, Kamala says she's running, but there has been some people like Barack Obama who said there's a process in place. Eric Adams said there's a process in place. We need to see what other people will kind of come to the fore here. And there is a lot of, there is some good arguments for some other candidates. And there is, it's kind of something that I've toured on. I've heard the arguments for, handing Kamala Harris the nomination. Like, people just want somebody who can kind of speak and who isn't Joe Biden and isn't Donald Trump, and has kind of just relatively down-the-middle Democratic policies, which Kamala Harris does. And with that kind of Democratic, also legacy media apparatus behind her, she'll be able to mount a much more formidable challenge than her presidential campaign. But then you talk about, her presidential campaign in 2020 was really awfully run, and her vice presidential office, in terms of staff turnover, it's been better in the last few months, but it has not been very consistent at all whatsoever. So, prior to that, it was one of the biggest sources of leaks in the Biden administration early on was how pissed off Kamala Harris is that she's not getting recognition she deserves and all that. So it really does seem like there is at least some desire in the party to maybe not coalesce right around Harris. Although I do think that Biden coming right out of the gate, fully giving his backing to Harris, is going to prove significant. But again, it all comes down to that convention. We'll see if that nominating date gets moved up. That's going to be something to watch very closely. And what happens with the Biden delegates, which is obviously the vast majority of the delegates, because we had a quote unquote primary where every candidate was given a very good and equal shot, and the DNC really encouraged it. Of course, I'm kidding there. But those delegates now are going to presumably be released. And Kamala Harris will probably pick up a lot of them, especially with the president's endorsement. But there could be a good chunk of those, especially if another heavy hitter gets into the race. And, because we're going to have some sort of convention in a certain way, shape, or form. And if there's delegates get behind someone else who makes a move, things could get interesting. But what is the likelihood of someone making a move? Maybe, not the exact best, because a lot of, the rumor has been a lot of the top heavy hitters like, J.B. Pritzker, Gretchen Whitmer, Gavin Newsom, all those who have pretty much said they want to keep their powder dry for 2028 and get a cleaner shot at the apple here. So I think she is definitely the strong favorite going in now, but really it is going to be interesting to see if anyone else tries to seize it, make a move. And again, in order to have a kind of flash primary like so many people have been talking about, you've got to have people who want to run. I saw Joe Manchin throwing his hat in the ring, which I think does go jive with a lot of the reporting that, trying to force another candidate in there to compete with Kamala has been a largely donor class invention, because who is not a creature of the donor class if not Joe Manchin? So there's some horror stories for a lot of people in the Democratic Party is, voting for Joe Manchin at the top of the ticket. That would be an idea I think would be very unlikely to succeed, and if it did succeed, even more unlikely to bear electoral fruits. But that is a kind of a sign of the things that could happen, which is really anything at this point. But the most likely outcome is Kamala knocks down the nomination, especially with Biden's support. But it is not really open and shut, and the mechanisms around the transfer are not nearly as ironed out as many Democrats kind of assume or maybe would want them to be at this time. So what to watch for next is the plans, how we see the transition, and whenever the hell Biden, Sleepy Joe, gets to the microphone to talk about this, he'll probably outline a lot of that in terms of what's next. But bottom line is, a big time narcissist, war criminal, Israel supporter, and somebody who, a lot of ways economically did meet the moment more than, maybe Democrats past like Obama would have, but somebody who kind of in the more consistent, in the more broad way, in the more important way, the fact that he was 81, the fact that his narcissism pushed this campaign, this ill-fated, doomed Biden campaign at an 82-year-old man to try and run for 4 more years in office, like a deeply selfish man who, if history is written by any smart people, will have a rough go of it there, has stepped out of the presidential race, which throws open, a likely Kamala Harris nomination, but in reality, a whole road of many, many possibilities to come. That's all I got for you guys today. Excuse all the noises of the crickets walking around in my yard, but we'll be back with a normal sounding show tomorrow.